Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Liquor Licensing Panel in the Council Chamber on Monday, the 19th of December at 10 a.m. Before I start, may I just ask, is everybody comfortable with the temperature? Good. And I have been advised that the chairman's usual microphone is having a bit of a moment, so there may be some lapses in procedure while the microphone catches up with things. I'm Councillor Norman Webster. I'm chairing the panel today, and to my left I have my two councillor colleagues, Councillor Anthea Lee and Councillor John DeBell, and to my far left is John Bryant, the licensing officer. To my right we have Paul Vickers, who's the litigation team leader. Don't be frightened by the word litigation. He just happens to be here as a legal representative. And then we have Kevin Toogood, who is the Assistant Director for Legal Services and Democratic Services. On my far right, the applicant further around the table and the interested parties facing us. And in the two corners, we have officers operating the IT and taking minutes. And before we start, I just want to read out the chairman's safety announcement. The building fire alarm signal is a continuous two-tone alarm. On hearing the evacuation alarm, leave the building by the nearest marked exit. Follow the green signs to the assembly point, which is in the large staff car park opposite the entrance to the building, and anyone who cannot use the stairs will be helped by the officers present after others have left the building. Do not return to the building until told it is safe to do so by an authorised officer. The whole of the council site is a no smoking area. Filming from the public gallery is permitted, but members must please refrain from filming within the council chamber so as not to distract the meeting. Mobile phones must be switched to silent, please. Item 1 on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence, and apologies have been received from Councillor Mockford, who is unwell, and Councillor Lee is substituting for her, so thank you for that. The second item is to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Colleagues, do you have anything to declare? No, thank you. The procedure of the licensing panel will follow in considering the application as set out in the Licensing Act 2003, its attendant regulations, and was agreed by the Licensing Committee on the 2nd of February 2005. The Licensing Panel, in accordance with Rule 14 of the Licensing Act 2003, open brackets hearings, close brackets regulations 2005, decide to exclude the public from all or part of the hearing where the licensing panel considers that it is in the public interest to do so. Colleagues, are you happy to continue as we are? Yes. Thank you. Before we do continue, I just want to ask the interested parties, are you content that you have had sufficient time to read through the documents? They are required to be sent out 10 days before such 10 working days from such a meeting as we are having today. It is in fact 10 days. To have observed the 10 working days would have put us right up to Christmas on Friday. So we took the decision to publish the papers as soon as possible and to hold the meeting today. If you are not happy to proceed today, we can recall hearing at a later date. But of course it will delay the issues over the Christmas period. Are you happy to continue as we are all here? Yes? Yes?
I'm actually not sure. I'll go with what the majority say, but I do think it's important that it's known that
Can you hold on just 1 second? I think we need to switch the
Sorry,
microphone on.
and it'll go red when you can speak.
No, I will happily go with what the majority, well, or unless Anita feels strongly, but I do think that I definitely want it on record. I heard nothing until the first I got of the documents, so that this was happening, was on Thursday morning. So the letter written to me is dated the 13th of December, but the email was not sent till after 10 p.m. on Wednesday night, the 14th, and by which stage I was in bed. And so I didn't see it until the following morning, and then I had a full day. So I've had 2 days, along with everything else that I had to do, to go through this, and it's a very important matter to all of us here. So I'm hesitant, but Anita, you please.
Yes, I do agree. I did ask for an adjournment. I contacted Mr. Vickers, but that point was ignored because I didn't actually get it until the Thursday. I didn't have a chance to start looking at it until the Friday, and the Appendix 2 was not attached.
Yes.
So, which is quite an important document, quite long, needs a lot of attention. I didn't get that until the Friday. So between us, we've literally had the weekend to get all our thoughts on paper and to present them to you. So I, again, like Angela, I'm happy to go with the majority because it would be nice to move on slightly, but I would like it put on record that I'm not entirely happy.
And Sue, you were.
And I haven't had anything at all because I haven't got a computer and everything should come to me by post, and I haven't had anything back whatsoever.
Yeah, obviously the postal strike
Yes,
has affected
it's not my fault, it's
everything.
not yours.
I quite agree.
Yes, I was the same. I didn't get it till Thursday morning either, which has left me, in both of us actually, very short of time to prepare for the meeting. And I would like this to go on the record and be taken into consideration, please. But I am happy to go ahead now, and I'll go along with how we all feel.
So do you collectively feel that we can proceed today, or would an adjournment cause unnecessary worry for you, or would you prefer to have our decision as soon as possible? Okay, thank you. Alison, can I just ensure that thank you. And I'm sorry, I should have said that when you press the button for the microphone, it will flash green, and under normal circumstances you would think, well, that's saying green to speak, but it's not. It's saying green to get ready, and when it turns red, you can speak. IT logic somewhere along the line, yeah. And also, if I could just ask Paul Vickers to explain the difference between a planning application approval and a licensing hearing, please.
Yeah, well, certainly the panel here today is purely dealing with the licensing application. if there are any concerns in relation to any planning matters, and obviously I've seen that they've been raised, some concerns have been raised in the representations, that is not, today is not the forum for addressing that. If there is to be any complaints in relation to planning issues, then that's something that has to take place with either to the licensing department of the council, the relevant authority, and is something that has to be dealt with separate from today's matter. Today is purely dealing with the licensing application and in relation to the licensing objectives in the Licensing Act of 2003. So that's the only thing we're dealing with today. To say if there are concerns over planning issues, that's a separate matter, and today is not the correct forum for addressing that.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've received declarations of interest and there are none. Item 3 on the agenda is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting of the liquor licensing panel held on the 1st of July. Councillor de Bell, you were the only member present who was present at that meeting. Are you content? I am. Thank you. So we have before us an application for a new premises licence. And I would go to John Bryan to introduce the item, please.
Chair, thank you. Members, the matter before you this morning is an application for a new premises licence. The report before you provides information in order that the licensing panel can determine this application. And in summary, an application pursuant to Section 17 of the Licensing Act 2003 has been made by Mr Robin Langton, who's the Managing Director of Highwood Wine Estate, for the grant of a new premises licence at Highwood Wine Estate, Deeks Lane, Anstey, Cuckfield. There are 5 members of the public, referred to as interested parties within the Act, who have submitted representations objecting to the application on the grounds of the prevention of a public nuisance. The interested parties are all local residents. Now, yourselves as the licensing panel are asked to determine this application in accordance with the Licensing Act of 2003, the Mid-Sussex District Council licensing policy, and the Home Office guidance which is issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003, whilst having due regard to the applicant's submissions and the relevant representations. Background to the application is the Highwood Wine Estate is an established vineyard which is accessed off Deeks Lane in Anstey, and the vineyard land consists of around 100 acres with an on-site office / vineyard store building and winery. The application is to licence the area which contains the winery together with a new shop / garden bar in the same area. The application states that the intention is for alcohol to be consumed in the shop / garden bar as tasting samples and for the provision of on and off sales. The tastings are in connection with planned tours of the vineyard, and obviously the panel will be aware that the tours themselves do not constitute a licensable activity. The applicant seeks the following licensable activities and timings, which is the supply of alcohol for the consumption on and off the premises, Monday to Sunday, 11 AM to 2100 hours. The requested opening hours for the premises will be the same, Monday to Sunday, 11 till 9 PM. The application was originally accepted on the 20th of September, but due to advertising issues and then amendment and resubmission of the plan, the application had been extended and actually concluded on the 1st of December 2022. The application was advertised on site and also within the Mid-Sussex Times. In total, I received 15 representations against the application during the extended consultation period that I was not able to accept as they did not address the licensing objectives. They concern matters which could not be considered relevant to this type of application. A further representation was received in support of the application, but again, it wasn't accepted as it didn't address the licensing objectives. The representations have been received from 5 members of the public, as I said, referred to as interested parties, which did have some relevance to the licensing objectives, and the main points raised within these representations that are relevant relate to the objective of prevention of a public nuisance. No representations have been received from any of the responsible authorities, including the Police and Environmental Protection team. During the consultation, the applicant requested that additional information be passed to the interested parties, together with an offer to meet them to see if their concerns could be addressed. And I have detailed what Mr. Langton said, explaining that he believed that there was some confusion over the application. He will not have piped or recorded music. He will not accept buses or coaches. They're a super luxury brand, and any responsible couples will be, customers will be coming as couples. They will not accept any loud or raucous behaviour, full stop. That it was going to be a special and high-end experience, and they expect their customers to respect it. And if anyone would like to meet him so he can explain or discuss further, he was happy to do so. I'm only aware, since the writing of the report, that one of the applicants contacted Mr. Langton, but obviously in his submissions he may well be able to detail that further. There was further observations received from the applicant's agent during the consultation period. It was stated that in respect of recorded music, that any music was envisaged to be background only. And obviously under these circumstances it's not regarded as regulated entertainment. That there was further observations regarding general noise nuisance and the nature of the business, but the business would be visitor only and likely to only attract wine enthusiast wine club members, and therefore wouldn't describe the clientele as high risk. Obviously, he pointed out as well that the wine tours per se is not a licensable activity, and that the applicant had considered noise mitigation and explained that a number of trees had been planted and there were plans to plant a number of more trees and hedging to enhance this mitigation. There was 2 further conditions offered, which are detailed in Appendix 10, and the full email is attached at Appendix 2. The panel should be aware, when reading the representations from the interested parties, that some of the information contained within their representations would not be considered relevant within this type of application. These are references to differences with the operating hours and the existing certificate of lawful development, the absence of specific planning consents or permissions, the road network in the area, access to the site, and the rural nature of the area and potential for light pollution should be ignored when considering these representations. The panel must focus on the relevant parts only and disregard the irrelevant matters when determining the matter. The police have agreed conditions with the applicant, and in addition, the applicant has offered further conditions which are attached to the report. And if the panel decides to grant the licence, I would request that in addition to the mandatory conditions, the conditions offered by the operation schedule and those agreed by the police be attached to the licence. Now, the representations. The interested parties' representations are detailed within the report, and obviously a number of them are present to give further detail of the representation in person. So I shall, in brief, go through the representations and leave it to the interested party to explain the representation in detail. The first representation is from Anita Batten, who's made representations on the grounds of prevention of public nuisance. She has stated that the effect of the public wine tasting, the buying of products from the shop, drinking alcohol in the garden area, and listening to recorded background music outside will create excessive noise, that personally would have an adverse effect on her health and well-being, as she has MS, and a symptom of this is chronic diseases, fatigue. She has to sleep in the afternoon or early evening, and that the operation of the premises would cause her far-reaching problems, as she wouldn't be able to facilitate this rest. She was sent the email detailing the measures that have been put in place to mitigate the potential noise nuisance, but she rejected those as being inadequate. The full details of her representation and response are appended to the report at Appendix 5. The next interested party was Mr. Andrew Moss, who made representations on the grounds of prevention of a public nuisance. As stated, his full representation is attached to the report Appendix 6, and there are parts of his representation relating to potential increase in traffic, access to the site, rural nature of the area, possible light pollution, which are not relevant for the purposes of this application. and the panel should focus on the pertinent part of his representation, which is our first concern is regarding the recycling time. Within the operation schedule, it said there will be no bottling out between 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. He said, we believe the licence activity allows the sale of alcohol between 11 a.m. and 9 p.m, so why so late and early? The noise recycling bottles makes, glass smashing on glass on outside containers, travels easily in this particular landscape, and we believe it would be a public nuisance so late into the evening or early in the morning. I feel the late night serving of alcohol would cause many problems, as mentioned in the prevention of nuisance guidance, but most specifically in relation to noise levels. We're also concerned about the increased noise of people drinking alcohol outside, listening to music in large groups. Noise naturally increases, in addition to noise will be generated by the additional staff, shop visitors and tasting tour guests and other corporate events. I think it would be pertinent at this point to remind the panel that the performance of live and recorded music isn't a licensable activity when it takes place on licensed premises, which have the benefit of an on licence, and it takes place between 8 a.m. and 11 p.m, and there's no more than 500 people present. That's not a regulated activity, so any concerns that the panel would have couldn't be regulated through the premises licence because you can't regulate an unregulated activity. However, if the licence was granted and there were issues with regard to noise from music, then that would be addressed by the Environmental Protection Team through the powers that they have in respect of statutory nuisance. Representations were also received by Sue Charlton and John Barrett. Their representations were made by letter on the grounds of a prevention of a public nuisance. They detailed that they live opposite the entrance to Highfield Wine Estate and believe the effect of the proposed application would cause excessive noise, which is likely to affect them as a public nuisance. They state that this is due to the noise from the winery will travel downhill towards their address, and they state they can already hear music from Whiteman's Green, Anstey and Hickstead, which are some distance away. Their representation in full is appended to the report at Appendix 7 for the benefit of the panel to read in detail what they've said. Amanda Daniels has made representations on the grounds of prevention of public nuisance. Again, detailed in the report, there are areas which will not be relevant for consideration in this application. It's there for the panel to see. I won't repeat it at this point. But she has stated the running and the operation of the proposed wine tours and its related wine tasting and purchasing products from the shop and people drinking alcohol in the garden bar on the away days and the hiring of the garden bar for special occasions that advertised on the website while listening to recorded background music inside and outside would cause excessive noise in an intrinsically quiet area. She mentions about marquees and the visitor centre. I would ask that the panel disregard that, as the erection of marquees isn't part of the licensing objectives and that will be dealt with by planning. And she says the effect of the noise that is likely to happen, whether generated inside or outside, will become a public nuisance, which will affect their well-being, as one of them suffers from Parkinson's and often sleeps during the day. She points out that travelling from the winery, the topography of the land slopes in a north to southeasterly direction to where they live, approximately 1,000 metres from the winery, and that this will allow any noise to travel easily to the house, particularly when there are no other industrial noise or other noise generated elsewhere in the area. And she mentions that they can quite easily hear the hum of the electric generator that's used by the vineyard at the moment, and noise as far away as Cookfield Cricket Ground, Anstey Social Club and Hickstead when it hosts various events. She points out that if she lived in the town, the likely noise generated from the vineyard would be lost amongst the normal urban noise pollution, but as it's a very quiet area, noise is able to travel more easily, and it's usually a very peaceful place to live. She mentions that the applicant proposes to continue until 9 p.m, and the likely effect of that is to create greater public nuisance, as it's even quieter in the evening in the area. And she mentions that you can almost hear a pin drop at times. As I say, the representation is attached in full to the report, which the panel have had the benefit of reading and assessing. The final interested party is Angela Pope, who's made representations on the grounds of prevention of a public nuisance. Again, there are parts of the representation which wouldn't be considered as relevant, which relate to the use of the footpath and the plan of amplified music, which I've already mentioned. The representation surround the rural location of the area. It details the location of the interested parties in relation to the proposed licensed premises and the associated quietness of the area. It's stated that there's very little background noise, and noise from the licensable activity would be perceived to be greater. It details the fact that Garden Bar has access to a roof area, a decking area to the front, which can be used by customers, which will cause the noise to carry further. There's concern expressed around the timings mentioned in the application in respect of the disposal of empty bottles, together with the opening times. And the interested party states that the measures to reduce noise from the customers entering and exiting the premises, such as notices advising them to be quiet, would not be applicable as the area for them is open and the Garden Bar has bifold doors that can be opened in full. The representation from Angela Pope is attached at Appendix 9, and obviously those interested parties are here to expand on their representations and give further detail to the panel. Now, the policy context for this meeting is that the licensing panel must determine the application in accordance with the Licensing Act 2003, the Mid-Sussex District Council Licensing Policy, Home Office guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act, whilst having due regard to the applicant's submissions and the relevant representations. Within the report, I've set out the legislation, which I don't propose to go through at this point. And we have Mr. Vickers to advise on any legal parts you may have questions about in respect of the actual legislation. With regard to relevant representations, the Licensing Act 2003 require representations to address one of the 4 licensing objectives, which are the prevention of crime and disorder, the prevention of a public nuisance, the promotion of public safety, and the prevention of harm coming to children and young persons. And the Act states that a representation is a relevant representation if it is about the likely effect of the grant of the licence on the promotion of the licensing objectives. The objector must establish that such a consequence is a likely effect of the grant, i.e. more probable than not. I've detailed some of the guidance which is relevant, which is issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act. The first one at 9.3, where a representation concerning the licensing objectives is made by a responsible authority or by a relevant person, by an interested party, then the licensing authority's discretion will be engaged. Relevant representations can only be made in opposition to or in support of an application and can be made by any individual body or business that has grounds to do so. It goes on to state that a representation is relevant if it relates to the likely effect of the grant of the licence on the promotion of at least one of the licensing objectives. The guidance goes on to detail an example of representations which may or may not be relevant. And it concludes by saying, in other words, representation should relate to the impact of licensable activities carried on from the premises on the objectives. It is for the licensing authority to determine whether a representation, other than a representation from a responsible authority, is what's defined as frivolous or vexatious within the Act, on the basis of what might ordinarily be considered to be vexatious or frivolous. A representation may be considered to be vexatious if it's intended to cause aggravation or annoyance, whether to a competitor or other person, without reasonable cause of justification. And vexatious circumstances may arise because of disputes between rival businesses, and therefore local knowledge is invaluable in considering such matters. Licensing authorities can consider the main effect of the representation and whether any inconvenience or expense caused by it could reasonably be considered to be proportionate. It's recommended that in borderline cases, the benefit of the doubt about any aspect of a representation should be given to the person making the representation. The subsequent hearing would then be an opportunity for the person or body making a representation to amplify or clarify it. As a matter of practice, licensing authorities should seek to focus the hearing on the steps considered appropriate to promote the particular licence and objective or objectives that have given rise to the specific representation and avoid straying into undisputed areas. A responsible authority or other person may choose to rely on their written representation. However, they may not add further representations to those disclosed to the applicant prior to the hearing, but they may expand on their existing representation and should be allowed sufficient time to do so within reasonable and practicable limits. In determining the application with a view to promoting the licensing objectives, in the overall interest of the local community, the licensing authority must give appropriate weight to the steps that are appropriate to promote the licensing objectives, the representations, including supporting information presented by all the parties present, the guidance issued under Section 182 of the Act, and our own statement of licensing policy. The guidance states that licensing authorities are best placed to determine what actions are appropriate for the promotion of licensing objectives in their area. All licensing determinations should be considered on a case-by-case basis. They should take into account any representations or objections that have been made from responsible authorities or other persons, and representations made by the applicant or premises user as it may be. The authority's determination should be evidence-based, justified as being appropriate to the promotion of the licensing objectives, and proportionate to what it is intended to achieve. And finally, I've detailed 9.44 of the guidance, and I just detail or highlight the final sentence, which is the licensing authority is expected to come to its determination based on an assessment of the evidence on both the risks and benefits, either for or against making the determination. Obviously, in order to provide licensable activities, it must be conducted under the authority of a premises licence, and there are financial implications that the final decision made by the licensing panel in this matter is subject of an appeal in the Magistrates' Court by any party to the proceedings. Prior to concluding, I'll just take the panel through the appendices and the background papers. Appendix 1, you have the application made by the applicant, and on pages 28 and 29 and into 30 of the is the operating schedule and the details that the applicant intends to put in place. I will point out that the applicant has put on their application that they intend to be provisioning recorded music. That is an error, because provisioning recorded music would only apply in these circumstances to having over 500 people present, which is not intended. And within the applicant's correspondence, you can see that that isn't an intention, and I'm sure the applicant will be able to explain further when they give their submissions. After the application form, there are the two plans of the premises. They're hand-drawn, but they do meet the requirements of the Licensing Act. And what I will do is I will refer them in respect of the plans that you have at Appendix 3. The licensable area is the winery and the garden bar, which is indicated on the hand-drawn map. If you look at the aerial view of the site on Appendix 3, you'll see a red dot at Highwood Wine Estate, and the actual winery is the building just to the south-west of the red dot in that field there. The timing when the aerial photograph was taken, obviously the garden bar wasn't in place at that time. The second map on the Appendix 3 is a little bit more detailed map, which again shows the location of the offices. The licensable area will be just to the south of the pink word which says Cookfield, but it also gives the panel some benefit of where the nearby premises are in relation to the premises. On the plan, the second hand-drawn map is a more detailed plan of the garden bar. I'll take the panel through to Appendix 4, which are the photographs of the site, which obviously you can look in relation to the premises plan. Photograph number 2, which is a little bit clearer than photograph number 1, is a photograph from the entrance to the site, which is to be licensed. It shows the winery off to the right-hand side and the garden bar straight in front, that black building. Next picture on the following page is, again, shows the roadway going down towards Vineyard at the bottom with the garden bar on the, just off to the right-hand side. Further photograph taken from the same location shows the winery and the garden bar. The next photograph is from the bottom of that road where it bends round at the vineyard, directs up to the entrance to the site. And the next one is across to the left-hand side showing the garden bar and the winery. Next 4 photographs are a more detailed view of the garden bar area and the decking area. And the following photograph shows the view from the decking area across the vineyard. And then we have 2 further photographs showing the winery. In the further appendix, Appendix 5 is the full representation from Anita Batten, including the correspondence in respect of the proposals put forward by the applicant. Appendix 6, we have the representation made by Mr. Tempted to say Mr. Moss. It is Mr. Andrew Moss. Appendix 7 is the letter which was sent through by Sue Charlton and John Barrett, and their full representation. Appendix 8, we have the full representation from Mr. and Mrs. Daniels, and also at Appendix 9, we have the full representation from Mrs. Angela Pope. Appendix 10 details the proposed conditions if the panel are minded to grant the licence, which detail the conditions which have been agreed with the police, conditions which result from the operating schedule, and conditions which have been additionally proposed by the applicant during the consultation period. That is the report before the panel at this time, unless I can assist the panel any further with the content of the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bryan. Do I see behind you that the thermostat for this room is set at 17 degrees? Because if it is, that's too cold. Could we please have it at least 19? '21. Thank you. I was having difficulty concentrating, and I could see people were shivering.
Thank you, Chair. My hands are extremely cold as well.
Good. But the pace of your presentation caused us to have to concentrate, so thank you very much for that, and thank you for covering everything that you did. And I do want to just highlight the fact that we are being asked to consider the human rights implications for both the licensee, who has rights under Article 1 of the first protocol, the right to property, which includes the license, and the objectors, who have rights under Article 8 to respect for privacy and family life, and Article 1 of the first protocol, their right to enjoy peaceful use of their possessions. And we also have people present in the room who have protected characteristics in terms of the law, and we need to carefully consider those protected characteristics as well. I would now invite the applicant to direct questions to Mr. Bryant, if you would wish.
What a wonderful report. Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you.
No questions? No questions. Good, thank you. I would invite interested parties, one by one, to direct questions to the licensing officer. And what I would suggest we do is we start with the person submitting according to Appendix 1, Appendix 5. Anita Batten. There you go.
Right. As you will see from my letter, which is Appendix 5, I have MS, which is a chronic condition. One of the symptoms of MS is fatigue. I have to sleep in the afternoon and I'm usually in bed by 8.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah?
This is for questions for the licensing officer rather than representations from the interested parties. I think Anita is starting to give her representation rather than addressing a question to me.
I thought that's what...
No, it's an opportunity to ask questions of the officer who's given his report. And then after that, we'll get to the position where you can make
Well, I think this
particular
is the
points.
problem, and I know we've agreed to carry on, but I think this is the problem with not having enough time to prepare, because I had no idea we were supposed to do that. And so I haven't got any questions, because I don't know what, you know, it's a very long report. How am I supposed to question that? That's my question.
Could I go to Paul Vickers for some legal advice, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think the way that it probably would be beneficial to clarify how today's proceedings are to continue is that, so initially Mr. Bryant reads through the report, and then any questions are directed to him from the interested parties, so starting with the applicant and then moving through the interested parties in the order of the appendices. Thereafter, if there are any questions for Mr. Bryant, which obviously need to address the content of his report and any clarifications or points that arise from that, it would then move to the applicant to expand on his, to make any representations he has. Once he's made any representation, then each interested party has the opportunity to ask questions of the applicant, again in relation to the licensing objectives. So those 4 licensing objectives are set out at page 16 of the document, but in particular in relation to the prevention of public nuisance. Once the applicant has made his representations, any representations, and answered any questions, then each interested party, so starting with yourself and moving on, will have the opportunity to make any observations, representations in relation to prevention of public nuisance, again, and obviously the issues that you've raised, the protected characteristic that the Chair has referenced. And then there will be the opportunity for questions to that and to be answered. So it's not no, we're not in a situation where there's cross-examination. It's simply questions that are asked that are designed to elicit the information that you want to come forward before the panel, so that the panel can then make their decision as to whether or not to grant a licence, and if so, if they do decide to grant it, what conditions, if any, to impose, if there are to be any over and above those suggested in the final appendix. So that's the procedure that we're going to adopt today. If you are content with that, then obviously what I'd invite you to do now is direct any questions you have to Mr. Bryant in relation to the content of that report. If you have none, so be it. And then once any questions have been directed to Mr. Bryant, then it would be a situation we then move to the applicant to make his representations, and you would then have the opportunity to ask questions of the applicant and we progress in that way. Does that make sense?
Please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, no. Is my answer.
I apologise for that. Can I ask what you would like me to clarify?
All of it, because I'll go back to what I've originally said. This wasn't how I understood how this was going to proceed. And in that, I have written a very short, brief speech of what I want the panel to understand. And that doesn't, whether that does or doesn't include questions that could be directed to Mr. Bryant, I don't know which bit to pick out.
Well, obviously, Mr. Bryant has produced the report based on the application and the written representations that have been accepted. Obviously, there were a number that were not accepted because they weren't in relation to the licensing objectives. If there's anything within Mr. Bryant's report, anything that he's said that you would require, that you seek clarification of, then please ask Mr. Bryant. You will have the opportunity to make your representations, but the way it sort of it works is that Mr. Bryant goes first, and then questions are asked by everybody else, then the applicant, and questions are asked by anybody else. Then the interested parties, one by one, and questions can be asked of the interested parties. And obviously, any questions can come from other interested parties, the applicant, or the panel. So that's the procedure that is to be followed. So effectively, if you have any questions for Mr. Bryant, please ask them. And as I say, you will get a chance to make your representations so that the panel, when they're making their decision, are aware of your objections to the licensing application, and then they can bear those objections in mind, and obviously those objections of any other interested parties here when making their decision, obviously, which has got to be made weighing up the law, the licensing objectives and the Licensing Act, and the regulations surrounding that.
Okay. Whether these are questions that were in the very lengthy report you said or not, I do not know. So you may have possibly stop me again, but here goes. So you mentioned non-amplified music, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mentioned amplified and non-amplified music.
So at what decibel will non-amplified music be played?
That's not relevant to this application. The playing of recorded, live or amplified music is not a regulated activity if there's less than 500 people taking place on licensed premises with the benefit of a non-licensed between 8 AM and 11 PM. What I would say is if unregulated music was played at a premises which caused a statutory nuisance, then a complaint would be made to the Environmental Protection Team, who would then investigate that. It can't be regulated by the licensing law or the premises licence because it's not a regulated activity, so it can't be regulated through the licence.
Right, but one day the music's too loud. Nobody's going to come and do anything about that on that day because you've got to make representations. So how can, I don't see how you can police that. I don't mean policing, how you can police that on a day-by-day basis, because the music and the noise of visitors is going to be different on each day. And we're talking up to possibly 500 people visiting.
What I would point out is that what you've mentioned is not, I know it may well be frustrating for you, but what you've mentioned isn't a regulated activity. It's not classed as regulated entertainment under the Act, and so it will not be controlled by the premises licence. If there are complaints of excessive noise or a statutory nuisance, they will be made to, or should be made to the Environmental Protection Team, and they will investigate it under the powers that they have. It will not be controlled through the premises licence.
So if I can just step in here, if questions could be asked through the chairman, please. And what I understand you to be saying is that the concern that, is it Mrs. Batten? Mrs. Batten has is around music at a certain noise level and for certain numbers of people, and the cut-off point is 500 people, and those issues are not covered by this this licensing panel, and it is for her or other affected residents to make their concerns known to the appropriate department within the council. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
Thank you. And is it fair to ask for the applicant to have a process whereby complaints are recorded with them and that residents have an opportunity to keep a diary of noise complaints, and that they have a contact person through the designated premises person to make complaints?
Yes, Chair. Well, all I would point out is that we've yet to hear from the applicant or the applicant's agent, who may well have something to cover that aspect within their submissions. But it is not uncommon for there to be a noise management plan or similar within a premises licence to assist with these issues.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Your concerns are noted, though. Could we go to Amanda Daniels? Mrs. Daniels?
I don't have any, sorry.
That's it.
I don't have any questions to ask John Bryant. I do have questions to ask, but not to John Bryant.
Okay, thank you. Andrew Moss? Mrs. Moss?
Yes, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Bryant. The first one, I mean, forgive my sort of that I don't understand completely licensing laws. I haven't read up on it sort of extensively. Is there any reason why the area to be licensed is so large? I mean, looking at the plan, which we've only had sight of literally for 2 days, it looks like the area comprises approximately, judging by the area of the winery, it looks like it comprises approximately 2 acres-ish. I was just wondering that if the licence, presumably, which is to drink alcohol, refers really, they're saying that they only are going to be consuming alcohol and selling alcohol in that tasting shop area, that specific area. Why would the licensing area be so vast?
That's probably a question that you'd want to direct towards the applicant.
Okay. My next question was, why would a winery need a licence as opposed to the tasting room? Is there any particular reason why a winery would need that?
Again, that's something that the applicant may well detail for you, but the licence enables the consumption of alcohol either on or off the premises, and if the winery forms part of the premises, then it forms part of the area where alcohol can be consumed. But it may well be that the applicant can give you further detail as to their reasoning behind wanting that part licensed.
Right, okay. And the other question I had for Mr Bryant was presumably that once a licence is granted, then an applicant is able to apply for temporary event notice. Now, being granted a liquor licence presumably takes that up from 5 times a year to up to 15 times a year. So presumably that's suddenly, if they have a licence for that 2.5 acres, suddenly to apply for a temporary, would that be an option for them to apply for a temporary event licence?
You don't need a premises licence to apply for a temporary event notice. They can currently apply for up to 20 temporary event notifications on the site as it is without a premises licence. The grant of a premises licence doesn't increase the number of temporary event notices that they're available for. If you've got to think that the legislation for a premises licence and a temporary event notice, although it falls under the Licensing Act, they're two totally different types of permissions to either sell alcohol or have regulated activity. So currently, without a premises licence, they could give 20 temporary event notices, and the temporary events could be an aggregate of 26 days, and that's totally separate to any premises licence. Premises licence doesn't change the amount of temporary event notices that they can apply for.
Oh, because I understood that it went from 5 to 15.
You are confusing the number of temporary event notices that someone without a personal licence can apply for,
Yeah,
and someone who has got a personal licence can apply for. And in fact, someone with a personal licence can apply for up to 50 notices. Someone
Right,
without a temporary...
but for one location.
I think the location is 20 event notices for the location.
Right,
The person can give up to 50 notices, so it can be at different locations.
different locations, yes, that's what I understood, yes, thank you. I think that's all my questions.
Angela Pope. Mrs. Pope? Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to state, rather like Anita, I've not been at all clear about this aspect, so I have listened and will address as best I can. And again, some of my questions, as I think Mrs. Moss has said, maybe more what should go to the applicant. But could I just, I think this is an appropriate one for you. I'm still at a loss to fully understand the scope of the licence which is being sought here. And again, you know, I don't have any more experience than what I've had to sort of read online or whatever, but I had thought that the application form and the operating policy schedule, that the applicant states clearly in that, you know, what their intentions are and the extent or scope, for want of a better word, of what the intended use should the committee you know, see fit to grant this license. Specifically, if you go through the application, you know, it says in the description of the premises that it mentions the visitor shop, and it says that's where the alcohol will be consumed, and that there will be a maximum of 20 persons on a tasting tour. So that's one area you see, I can see that fitting in as, you know, appropriate. Again, it comes in, why would you need such a large area? But I accept that's it. But that's one, you know, that's the visitor shop, that's the tasting. But then there is the email from the applicant's agent where they confirm, supposedly to reassure, I found it more alarming than reassuring myself, but that there will be a maximum of 60 people outside. So it's sort of, on the one hand, there is this, tasting alcohol in the context of a tour in a garden bar. And then there is, sort of 60 people outside. So, what are we solving to, as my husband would say, Are we talking about just tours and 20 people maximum and tasting? Are we talking about, more what I would call hospitality end of things, where you can have up to 60 people outside? And, needless to say, but saying it, the fact that it's outside, which is part of my representation, is, and just the general topography, the southwesterly wind, the whatever of this particular place, anything outside, the noise, nuisance, the excessive noise it's just exponential what happens. So I don't quite understand. Is it the tasting and tours 20 people maximum? Is it that plus a potential 60 people outside? Is it a bar in the sense of, I suppose, what, my young children, well, they're not children, my young adults at home would say, the garden bar. Is that, do they mean a beer garden? Okay, I appreciate it's a winery, but, what is the license specifically that's being sought here? And what, again, the temporary event notice, there's also minor variations, but if the panel committee were to see it appropriate to grant a license, and, we're not saying we don't understand why you might want to do tasting and whatever, but frankly, in this situation, it needs to be very clear what we're really talking about, and to allow yourselves to put the appropriate conditions or restrictions or whatever the word is in place. So is that an appropriate question? What actually are we talking about? What is the scope of this license?
Concerns are appropriate and we will consider them. And Mr. Bryant, do you want to answer?
I'll try and answer as succinctly as possible. Some of the matters that you raised, I'm sure, will be addressed to you by the applicant. In respect to the actual application, the application before the panel today is an application for a grant of a premises licence for the sale or supply of alcohol for consumption either on or off the premises. The number of persons present is not controlled by the premises licence. Purely what we're looking at is an application for the consumption of alcohol both on and off the premises.
No? Okay, thank you. Can we, panel members, do you have any questions of Mr. Bryan?
Absolutely clear, thank you.
No, thank you. Mr. Langton, would you like to?
That's Mr. Langton, but I'll probably kick off.
Right.
Right, good morning, members of the committee and everyone else. I'm Nick Semper, a licensing consultant, and I'm representing High Weald Wine Estate in their application for a premises licence, which is before you today. Now, the High Weald Wine Estate as a vineyard was founded in 2015 and covers 100 acres of land with some 115,000 vines comprising of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris and Pinot Meunier varieties. The vineyard is on land formerly occupied by a traditional working farm which has existed since time immemorial, and processes entailed in wine production on site are far less intrusive upon neighbouring residents than the former operation. Now, when ripe, the grapes are converted into some 250,000 bottles of sparkling white and rosé wine. All products are currently stored on site. Despite its relatively short history, their first release has been acclaimed as a champion English sparkling wine and they have won 3 further trophies at the prestigious International Wine Challenge. It is indeed a quality operation. Now, the intention lying behind this application for a premises licence is to provide a route to market, which has only been available via third-party sales platforms. This takes the format of vineyard tours and wine tastings, both correctly identified by Mr. Bryant in his report as activities that don't require a premises licence, and the bit that does, which is the on and off sales to the public via the visitor shop, which is set within that lovely garden and decking area. There will be some entertaining in the garden, but due to the low numbers of attendees, the maximum being set at 60, and the hours specified being 11 in the morning until 9 at night daily, these activities do not constitute regulated entertainment under the Licensing Act, and therefore fall outside the remit of this licensing committee. Now, as you can therefore see, members of the committee, this application is de minimis by its very nature, and in my submission is now incapable of generating the sort of issues raised by the representatives. Now, the initial application attracted some concerns of local residents, which resulted in many representations being received by a licensing authority, and we are very grateful to Mr. Bryant for reducing those matters before you to only those relevant for the purposes of the Licensing Act, i.e. those that speak to one or more of the licensing objectives. Now, in this application, the burden is on the applicant, Mr. Langton, assisted by myself, to show that the proposals in the operating schedule are capable of promoting the licensing objectives and will not undermine them. The representatives, any representatives opposing the application, on the other hand, have the burden to show that the premises, this premises here, trading under this operating schedule before you, will be likely to undermine the licensing objectives and to demonstrate that with evidence. In our submission, any subcommittee properly advised can only refuse the application if this operating schedule is found on the evidence of the representatives to not be capable of promoting the licensing objectives. So each application must be judged on its own facts and merits, and significantly, there is not one shred of evidence in the representations or before you today that challenges or criticises in any way the operating schedule, the premises, the applicant, or the designated premises supervisor. So several representations have been received from neighbours, to which I will respond in some detail shortly, but more significantly, I will now demonstrate who has not made any representation and are therefore completely content with the application. The licensing authority, here represented by Mr. Bryant, acting as a responsible authority and responsible for licensing in Mid-Sussex, take no issue with it. The police, who are your primary source of information on evidence of all crime and disorder and antisocial behaviour issues in Sussex, raise no extant representation, for we have come to terms with them. Significantly, the Environmental Protection Team, who lead locally on quality of life issues under the public nuisance objective, they have no objection. The Planning Department itself, which deals with planning and permitted business uses and the lawful development of premises in Mid-Sussex, raise no objection. Neither to the Highways Department. Trading Standards, who deal with underage sales of alcohol under the Protection of Children objective, raise no issues, and likewise Public Health, who deal with substance abuse, likewise have no issues. Now, it is therefore a logical and compelling conclusion that all the responsible authorities, by their silence, are satisfied that this application and its attendant operating schedule, as it stands, is capable of promoting the licensing objectives. Otherwise, they would have made representations and would be here to argue vehemently against it, as is their statutory duty. Further, it is clear that they, using all their experience and knowledge of the area in which these premises are situated, are satisfied that it will not, in any way, undermine any of the licensing objectives. Now, dealing with the neighbours' representations, Mr. Bryant has correctly distilled their content down and has identified that they are all centred on just one of the licensing objectives, being the prevention of public nuisance. Unlike statutory nuisance, public nuisance is not defined by the Licensing Act, but is described at para 2.15 of the Secretary of State's section 182 statutory guidance as, and quote, the effect of the licensable activities at the specific premises on persons living and working in the area around the premises, which may be, keywords, disproportionate and unreasonable. So, the issue for you to consider in my submission is whether any effects caused by the proposed activities would be disproportionate and unreasonable and therefore constitute a potential public nuisance to the representatives. So the representations in summary, I'll whiz through them because Mr. Bryant has done a fantastic job in laying them out, the relevant parts. Ms. Batten complains that wine tours, public wine tasting, buying alcohol in the shop and drinking alcohol in the garden will create excessive noise. To that I respectfully say that wine tours, wine tasting and the consumption of alcohol itself are not licensable activities and do not therefore fall within the remit of the licensing subcommittee, the panel. We are therefore then left with a question of whether buying alcohol from that shop set within that black box, reconstituted box, would it cause a disproportionate and unreasonable level of public nuisance? With respect to our position, it will not, and indeed it cannot, especially as we have limited the attendees to that whole area to being 60. Now, Mr. Moss wishes to complain about recycling times, okay? He has come to visit the site and we're very grateful for that visit, and we've offered to amend those times around recycling from 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, which he finds acceptable seemingly. He also suggests that this is a late night operation, when clearly the terminal hour 2100 hours, by the terminal hour 2100 hours, it is not. He complains of large groups of people drinking and listening to music. Well, regulated entertainment has been removed, expunged from this application, and with a maximum of 60 persons at the occasional events proposed, that does not constitute a large group of people. Now, Mr. Barrett and Ms. Charlton complain that the proposed activities will cause excessive noise and claim that they can already hear music from large public events at Whiteman's Green, Anstey and Hickstead. With respect, what is proposed here is nothing like those other events listed in either style or scale. Ms. Daniels similarly complains that wine tours, public wine tasting, buying alcohol in the shop and drinking alcohol in the garden will create excessive noise. To that again, I respectfully say that wine tours, wine tasting and the consumption of alcohol of itself are not licensable activities and therefore outside the remit of the panel. Again, she complains that she can already hear music from large public events at Whiteman's Green, Anstey and Hickstead. With respect, what is proposed here is nothing like those events listed in either style or scale. And she also states she can hear the hum of the electric generator from the vineyard. To that I'd say there's been a farm on this site since time immemorial, and the winery is considerably quieter than any normal farming operation. Essentially, she states that the location is so quiet that she can hear a pin drop. So any expansion of activity in the vicinity that might generate additional noise is mightily unwelcome. That is as may be. But the test here is not whether you can hear a pin drop or not. It's whether what is proposed in this de minimis application will actually cause a disproportionate and unreasonable public nuisance. Now, lastly, Ms. Pope explains that the area is exceptionally quiet and therefore any licensable activity would be perceived to be greater. She explains that the roof and terrace platform of the garden bar will cause any such noise to travel further and takes issues with the bifolding doors to the premises. She mentions the disposal of bottles, which we addressed in our concession to Mr. Batten. Now, we don't actually argue with her on the fact that the area is exceptionally quiet and therefore any noise generated by any licensable activity would be perceived to be greater. And we also don't deny the existence of a roof terrace. You've got the photographs of it, and also that decking and the bifold doors. What we question, respectfully, is whether the effect of the licensable activities proposed in the application at the specified premises would be disproportionate and unreasonable on persons living and working in the area. That is the test that you should apply with respect, as defined by para 2.15 of the section 182 guidance. And clearly our position is that it would not. Now, we have a response to the neighbourly concerns, our neighbours' concerns. First action. All requests for regulated entertainment, live and recorded music, correctly identified by Mr. Bryant, have been expunged from the application. The applicant has no intention to provide food to visitors other than canapes, which is not a licensable activity in any event, and he has no intention to create a wine-orientated Wetherspoons, as this is not his style, or a Glastonbury-style event, as that would most likely lead to destruction of his very delicate vineyard. No representation has been raised by any relevant responsible authority with regards to any of these issues in any event. Okay. Mr. Langton has written to all the representatives explaining, we are a super luxury a super luxury brand with responsible customers, usually coming in couples. We will not accept any loud or raucous behaviour, full stop. We do not want to cause nuisance to anyone. This is a special, high-end experience, and we expect our customers to respect that. Now, Mr. Langton also offered to meet any and all of the representatives in person, but to date, only Mr. Moss has accepted his kind offer, and they have come to an accommodation. I myself have communicated with the licensing authority the following additional information that has been passed kindly by Mr. Bryant to the representatives, in that the premises are set in their own grounds and are already surrounded by trees which minimise noise nuisance. To date, a further 10 mature trees have been planted by the applicant to mitigate further against any noise nuisance. And Mr. Langton plans to plant a further 30 more mature trees and over 200 metres of hedging to reinforce his considerable efforts to minimise noise escape from the site. Furthermore, you will see on page 34 of the appendices, of the report, I should say, that we have also offered 2 further conditions in the hope of reassuring these good people. Those are 2 that are that no noise or vibration shall emanate from the premises so as to cause a nuisance. I'm talking, paraphrasing here. And secondly, that we will turn down the news immediately. We will turn down the noise immediately at the request of the police or an authorised person under Section 13 of the Licensing Act 2003, and that's your Environmental Protection Officer. So if we're making too much noise, we will turn down immediately. So we've been making notes to each other. I feel there's going to be another one coming on in a minute. But we are more than prepared, Chair. Thank you very much indeed for your suggestion about a noise management plan. We are happy to have a noise management plan and to provide it to Mr. Bryant in due course. And that's where we are with that. Now, so in conclusion, sorry to take so much of your time, but these are all very relevant concerns from these good people. Members of the committee, you must perform a balancing act. You must balance the ambitions of the applicant to continue to grow his successful business against the concerns of his neighbours who fear and speculate that his quality operation will decline into a raucous beer garden should you grant this application today. I respectfully submit that it won't, as Mr. Langton won't jeopardise his life's work, his business and career by ever letting that happen. I would also appeal to your legal advisor on a general legal point in that fear and speculation as to what might happen at some undisclosed point in the future is excluded from your consideration by the dictum of Her Honour Justice Black in the Daniel Thwaites and Wirral Magistrates case, where she explained that your decision-making should be actuated by real evidence of actual problems. That is our most massive summary, and I will clearly let your legal advisor advise you on that case in recess accordingly, because it has binding precedent upon us. Here, before you, there is no evidence of public nuisance, just the fear and speculation that public nuisance might ensue were you to grant this application. Our submission clearly is that it will not. And even in the event that it did happen, then the Licensing Act provides you, the Licensing Subcommittee, with the means to remedy that eventuality through your own powers of review. Any party can bring a licensed premises review if there is evidence that the licensing objectives, and in this case public nuisance, prevention of public nuisance, are being undermined. That should be of great comfort to anyone still harbouring any genuine concerns. Now, this hearing is an evidence-based decision-making process. There is no hard evidence in the representations before you. This hearing is simply about whether these premises operating under this operating schedule, amended by the concessions that we've made, will undermine or promote the licensing objective of the prevention of public nuisance. Clearly, the responsible authorities for Mid Sussex do not believe there is a problem. My position is that it will clearly promote them. This is a quality operation which has not in the past and will not in the future impact adversely, disproportionately or unreasonably on anyone. Consequently, I respectfully request that you grant this application for a premises licence as sought, including the attendant comprehensive raft of effective conditions, and in doing so, that we all wish this successful vineyard every continuing success going forwards. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semper.
Sorry if I gave the impression of leaving and just got in my way.
No problem. Mr. Langton, would you like to address the panel at all? No?
Mr. Semper said it, sorry. Other than to say, you know, we've picked up on a point of a noise management plan, and I'm more than happy to implement that. I feel I've done my best to reach out to everybody and listen to what they've said, and obviously that continues to be the case.
Okay.
We want to be a good neighbour.
Okay, good. Thank you. Will do. Colleagues, do you have any questions?
No, I think that was very comprehensive.
Okay. Interested parties, do you have any questions? Please go ahead. You need to press your...
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. That was very comprehensive. I've tried to make notes. It's unfortunate we didn't have prior sight of your submission in the same way you've seen ours, because in addition to just having an appropriate amount of time to prepare, rather than hastily making my notes, I would be able to deliver something slightly more coherent. However, I'll do my best, because you have raised quite a lot, and there is quite a lot. I don't have your copy, but I would like it afterwards, please. I absolutely, unequivocally believe that the grant of this license in that place, with those operating schedules and the mitigating points, even including the new noise management plan, suggesting, which I'll come back to in a moment, are not de minimis. Everything is relative, is it not? You know?
Can I just ask that you ask questions
Sorry.
at this point in time?
Okay,
I will
I'm
give you
sorry.
the opportunity to...
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. So just give me a moment then, please, just while I collect my thoughts.
Would anybody else
Yes,
like
sorry.
to ask a question in the meantime?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes, I've got two questions to ask the applicant. I believe he mentioned just now that the operations were de minimis. Now, I understand that at the present time, the vineyard operate under de minimis operations. Could you explain to me what you meant by that? Because I was given to understand that de minimis was to do with planning. So I can't quite understand why you have brought this into a licence operation or application. I haven't quite finished. Are you actually saying that what you're going to do is going to be greater than de minimis, or less, or as it is stands at the moment, under the Lawful Development Certificate, which is planning?
Right, okay. Planning does not form any part of this process today. I use the expression de minimis to show that it's very small in its effect and scope. Okay? We are talking about very limited hours under a tight operating schedule, which we've already offered to augment to placate your concerns. Although the wine tasting and wine tours are not licensable, we've told you that the wine tours involve 20 people with some tasting at the end, and the tasting events involve a maximum of 60. But again, we underpin that by saying that those are not licensable activities. So please don't read too much into my use of the word de minimis. It just means very small. Okay, nothing to do with planning. Okay?
Question to ask you. I mentioned in my statement that the away days and the hiring of the garden bar for a special occasion, as advertised on the High Weald Wine website, contributed to the noise levels. How many people will High Weald Estate Wines expect to have at these corporate events? I don't believe this was in the application, but it is on your website, I understand.
I think
There, you're on.
I think obviously there's the point of, and I defer to the legal expertise about whether some things are licensable or not. The garden bar takes about 20 people. That's about how big it is. You could probably get 40 or 50 on the deck, but again, the numbers don't really apply. I don't expect to have large corporate events. The main activity is, the point of being there is the tour and the education, to bring people in, to explain about English winemaking, to take them on a tour of the vineyard. It's an increasing part of their local economy around Sussex, Kent and Hampshire. So it's education around growing, production, and then hopefully they buy some wine, they maybe have a glass of wine, they go away. Corporate events, I would expect to fit in that room about 20 people.
Thank you.
You can't fit any more in the room, to be honest. You can see how big it is.
Is it right that you've amended the content of your website as well? Can you just talk them through that just a bit?
It reflects what I've just said to you. Now, what we can fit in that room is about 20 people. You could fit more people on the deck. I don't know how that fits vis-a-vis what's licensable and what's not. That's great.
Has your website been amended then? Because I've got a screenshot here of what you've, of your website advertising your hiring of a garden bar for special occasions, looking for a away day with colleagues. Please contact High Weald Wine Estates. Are you saying that that's now been amended and that you're not advertising it anymore?
I'm not saying that we're not going to do those things. I'm saying that I think anything we do like that will fit under the remit of this application. We're not going to do something that isn't within an application we make. We just don't operate like that.
Thank you for answering that question.
just again, just to clarify that point, you've mentioned, given the size of the garden bar and the visitor shop, 20 people is maximum what it could accommodate in a manner in which you would like to treat your customers, yeah? If that's the case, then why can the license not be confined to the garden bar building? Then proper noise management, like keeping the doors closed, double glazing, perhaps additional acoustic insulation in that area, would, I think, make a difference to sound and concerns. But I'm still struggling, and I'd like you to explain what evidence there is that with using an outside area, you can reduce the noise component of our concerns. And, well, let me ask, please, if you could answer that first, and then I can go on about my next point.
You said quite a bit there. Can you just drill down to the bit you want us to answer? And I will, we can develop it as we go on. What specific question have you got for me now?
Specific question, well, I've got a number, but let's start with what noise management strategies do you propose for people outdoors partaking in any of your activities?
Right. We've already offered a noise management plan, and that is done by a noise engineer and expert, okay? And that will predicate the control measures that are deemed necessary to make sure that there is no noise nuisance at the nearest noise-sensitive premises. Now, I'm not an expert on that. I know people are, okay, and you've got to let them, until it was suggested by the chair, it hadn't occurred to us because I didn't think that it was unreasonable and disproportionate what we're proposing, but if it would give you the reassurance, that will come. But until we've got that, we don't know what the control measures within it will be contained within it. But clearly, you have your normal good management. If you've got people making a heck of a lot of noise, he and his staff will tell them to be quiet, to calm it down. And if they do not calm it down, you ask them to leave.
Excuse me, sorry.
Can I just jump in
please,
there?
Yes, please do.
I think it comes back to much more simple things than that. I think the premise of the operation isn't for people to come and get drunk. We don't accept buses, we don't accept big groups of people. You know, if I look at our brand, the whole positioning of the enterprise is super elite, as it were, with the highest average price point in the UK market for entry-level wine. We're not looking for hen parties, stag parties, big groups. It's not the point of the operation. It doesn't work like that. We're looking for people who are our demographic, which is really people like yourselves, to be honest. Mm-hmm. You know, A, B, 1, 2, educated, intelligent people who are engaging in a local activity. So in terms of, it's a bit big picture, but just to say from the outset, it's, you know, we're just not looking to do that mass bulk tourism, which is relevant. In terms of managing it, it's a tour of 20 people because that's what you can manage as a person doing a tour. They're in the building, you take them around. If another tour comes behind them, then you've got 40 people milling around and then maybe some people staying for a drink. In terms of actual noise mitigation, the site, I think, we've put trees around the building. It does have double door, it does have double glazing. We are putting, if you know the site, from the top of the path down the hill, as you look down the path, we're planting 30 more mature trees. They're 4 metres when they come in. We're not planting trees that are going to grow. They're full-size trees at quite a significant cost. So that'll come right down both sides of the path and around the building. So then there'll be 3 lines of trees. and then hedging that'll go in at 1.4 metres and grow up to about 2 metres, coming down the outsides of that as well and round the garden. So there's quite a lot of physical work, for one thing. In terms of, it's not, and I'm not sure whether this is under the scope of the licensing or not, it isn't practical for us to expect people to come in and do a high-end tour, not to be able to, well, part of the experience and the education is walking around the path into the vineyard and into the winery. So it has to be the whole area, that area that's included. The other piece is that in the winery itself, if we sell wine for online, pick and pack as it were, that would be from the winery in a special area. So that's why that comes under the licensing. So I'm trying to answer your question of why it's that area. So it's for the tours to cover the area, to put wine in boxes in the winery and ship it out, and then just to use that space. And then the physical mitigation is trees and bushes, and then we can, noise management plan. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded. Very good.
I just want to confirm a couple of things. You are planting extensive numbers of trees, large. You have double glazing in the facility already, but in reality, the unfortunate thing is that it actually gets down to the designated premises supervisor or the person who is in control at the time to control the noise levels, because things like insisting that doors are closed and so on don't actually work. And it creates a false sense of security because it doesn't work. Let's be honest. What actually works is somebody saying to people, you are getting a bit rowdy, can you please be concerned for the residents and so on. So my question would be to you in terms of a noise management plan is, how long would it take you to produce a noise management plan if we were to agree some form of license or other to you? How long would it take? Please.
I'll just address your first point. I was Chief Operating Officer at Ridgeview. It's one of the most established English wine estates in the area. I was COO there for 2.5 years, and we had a garden bar there, tours and tastings, the same operation. And at no time no time during my time there did we ever have an issue with someone getting noisy. It isn't the demographic. And just to be clear, if somebody was out of order, we wouldn't ask them to be quiet, we'd ask them to leave. That is not, it's just not acceptable. That's not what it's about. In terms of the noise management plan, please, I honestly don't know. We can walk out of this room and get an expert, and we can expedite that process. I would have thought that would be a matter of weeks.
Well, look, there's two types of noise management plan, aren't there? There's the generic one, and as licensing consultants, clearly, we use those nightclubs and, different locations all the time. If you want a bespoke one done by a noise engineer specifically to the contours and content, the geographic layout of this place, that you're looking at about a month.
Thank you. I would expect a noise management plan specific to the venue if we were to agree that sort of point. Mrs. Pope.
Thank you. I entirely agree. I'm actually quite surprised that, given that all our representations are centred around excessive noise, noise propagation, impact on ability to live, work, health aspects, that you can say, I'm very surprised that you say you haven't thought about a noise management plan. I actually have read quite a lot about noise management. And I've read university reports from sound engineers, acoustics. I have papers here, I can share them with you if you like. The facts are the following, as I understand it. Acoustic barriers in terms of trees and planting are wholly inadequate. They don't come near it. It is about the issues with noise and propagation and the physics and the simple science and the geology of the area, topography of the land. We're not talking really about rowdy behavior. We would assume that people like yourselves would deal with that in the way you're saying. We're actually saying that just the congregation of people outside in an enjoyable area, high-end or not, if we were all there, that level of itself, that chatting, conversation, laughter, the sound is propagated. And we are all sufficiently near. On this map, your aerial view, I can show you actually, every one of the people here, our houses are actually on that. We are very close. We can hear. Ours is one of the closest. So trees, the reports, and you'll find this, and your experts will tell you, trees, they help with the visual. Yes, it's more aesthetically pleasing, and it's a bit like everything else, you know, it's the full senses, is it not? But in terms of acoustics and acoustic barriers, planting of trees, and particularly in this kind of area, are not effective. The further issues about sound and of course noise is unacceptable.
At this point, Mrs. Pope, could you ask some questions if you have?
Right.
If not, I think your point about noise and vegetation and so on has been well made, and we have heard that.
So would you consider just restricting the license to the use of the garden bar area with the doors closed and all the sound insulation that, you know, you've put in, which is wonderful. There's double glazing, keep it closed, don't go out, don't use the outside area. People walking around on a tour, that's different. But other things you'll find when you do get your sound advice is that things like decking is a big amplifier of sound. It's one of the least effective ways of doing it. So would you be prepared to reduce the hours and the days? You know, at the moment it's 363 hours, 363 days, sorry, from even if you say 11 until 9, whatever. Do you actually think there is a business model whereby you can have your business open all those days? Would you be prepared to reduce the days and the hours further and for it to be indoors?
Okay. Mr. Samper or Mr. Langton, could you answer those questions, please?
So I think there's 3 points there. The first point I'd make is that I don't think that what we're proposing is disproportionate and unreasonable, and that's the frame in which we're talking. We're more than happy to institute a noise management plan, as we've discussed, which I think is the appropriate way to address what your concerns are, and I recognise your concerns. And I guess the final point of that is that I'm not willing to make that amendment. No, it doesn't work with the business model.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we will consider that, and we will also consider the, if I heard correctly, the recycling time limit from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Right, we will consider that, and we will consider the responsibilities of the designated premises supervisor, and we will also consider the production of a noise management plan as a condition of licensing, should we agree to a license following our discussion after this panel hearing. Are there any further questions?
Yes, if I may. I think you said, and thank you, if I've understood, just to clarify, am I correct in what you've said, that you will be using, I don't know, is it the winery building or part of this for storage and as a distribution depot for online sales?
Distribution depot makes it sound like DPD. We're just talking about if you order online, if you ring up and order 2 cases of wine,
Yes,
that being put in a box and sent off, yeah.
yes. So, yes, so there will be additional delivery and just activities of surrounding the business of that with collections and distribution, yes.
So, if I can come in, please. Any business conducted on that site would result in either deliveries to the site or traffic away from the site in terms of delivery vehicles leaving the site, whether it was a farm or a winery or whatever. There is going to be additional traffic down that road. My concern for that road is that it is a narrow country lane, and I wonder if it is a registered road in terms of the road network. That, unfortunately, I don't think is a part of this licensing hearing from a legal point of view. It's a highways issue which we have no power over.
If I can come in there.
Mr. Vickers.
Yeah, I think you're right to raise those questions, but it's only in so far as it is relation to a licensable activity, and that licensable activity would then undermine the licensing objectives. And what we're looking at here is public nuisance, and use of a road, lawful use of a road, wouldn't be something that would be a licensable activity.
Yeah. So it's outside of the remit of this panel. So it's not something that we consider, unfortunately. Do you wish to?
I just turned it off.
Okay, okay. Are there any further questions, final questions?
Yes, just one in response to what we were just talking about. I think that actually it's the noise of the vehicles that are unloading and loading at the premises site that add and accumulate to the rest of the noise that's going on. Not so much the traffic, but it's the noise that they generate.
Okay.
Am I correct in saying that?
Mr.
How are you going, sorry, my question is, how are you going to deal with the noise of those vehicles that are unloading bottles, etc.?
Okay, my understanding is there's already 250,000 bottles of sparkling white and rosé wine produced on that site, and they are going to be moved one way or another. Nothing will actually change. The only way that you're going to get more volume is for the vineyard to expand, more volume of noise of deliveries and what have you, as if, for example, the vineyard doubles in size or doubles in production, and you're going to get double the amount of vehicular traffic to and from. Thank you.
I was actually talking about the noise of the motor vehicles and the chinking of the bottles as they're being unloaded and unloaded. That's what I was talking about, sorry.
It's not a licensing consideration, unfortunately. I fully appreciate your concern, but it's not a licensing, it's not for this panel to consider.
I understand what you're saying. It's not a licensing issue, but a licensing issue is public nuisance. So where do you define public nuisance and noise being made by vehicles or people? I mean, it seems to be a very wavy line of...
You're absolutely right. It is a wavy line, and it's a question of balancing the rights of the applicant to earn a living and the rights of the residents, and that some of those residents having protected characteristics as well. And I think Mr. Vickers will be able to answer that better than I have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. The issue in relation to the public nuisance is about the likely effect of the grant of the licence on the promotion of the licensing objectives, so the reduction of public nuisance. If there were no licence to use the garden bar in the way that the licence application is, the winery would still be able to sell the 250,000 bottles of wine that it stores there by packing them to vans, boxes, etc., and sell them in the way that as I understand it, it currently is. So the noise from the vehicles and from the conduct of the business as it currently is without that licence is not affected by the licensing application. So any noise nuisance is a separate matter from the licensing objective and can be looked at by environmental health if it is an issue, and that is something that you can and should raise if you believe it is an issue. You know, that there are entirely proper statutory routes that you can pursue to address any noise nuisance, and that's something that you can do, but it is separate from the question that we're looking at today, which is the Licensing Act objectives. The representation, the likely effect of the grant of the licence isn't going to change any noise from bottles being packed and delivered on and off, because that occurs currently and isn't an ongoing issue. If it becomes an ongoing issue, if it becomes something that is a noise nuisance, that's separate to a Licensing Act decision. However, if there is noise that relates to a Licensing Act, to the grant of the premises licence, then that is something that could be called back in front of the panel, as I'm sure Mr. Langton and Mr. Semper are only too well aware. But the point I'm trying to make, and I apologise if I'm going slightly long-winded in making that, is that we are here to determine the effect of the licence that is being sought as to how that impacts on public nuisance, not how the operation of the business as it currently operates has any impact on public nuisance. Am I making myself clear? I know. Okay, I apologise for that. Let me try and break it down. I apologise if I am being obtuse here, but the concerns that have been raised all in relation to public nuisance. If the licence were not granted, because it was felt by the panel that there would be a public nuisance caused by the granting of the licence, all of those points that have been raised about vehicle access, bottles being packed, the noise of vehicles and the use of Deeks Lane for that are still going to go ahead because they're not licensable activities. So all of those things are going to carry on. What we are concerned with today is what impact the application for the licence would have on causing a public nuisance. And that's the only question that we're looking at today. Is that, if I explain? I apologise, I know sometimes I go off on sort of a diatribe almost, but so I apologise for that. I'm trying to address it as best I can.
Mrs. Moss.
I just wanted to ask specifically that I've understood this correctly. The licence that's been applied for is specific to Mr. Langton? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a premises licence.
Yeah.
So it's
My only question would be, I completely understand when you're saying that what you're proposing is small groups of 20. I know your colleague sort of said that a lot of things are speculation, but obviously from our point of view, as long as it stays small, then we're probably perfectly, we'll rub along very well together. But what is to say that the people who own the vineyard suddenly decide, actually, do you know what? This isn't working for us. We'll sell the vineyard to somebody else. Does that licence go along with the vineyard, or is the licence specific to Mr. Langton's operations?
Yes, perhaps I can clarify that. The application is in the name of Mr. Langton, so he will be the premises licence holder. He will hold the premises licence. If the premises was sold to a third party, then the two options to them would be for the premises licence either to be transferred from Mr. Langton to the new owners, or Mr. Langton would give up, surrender the current premises licence, and the new owners would have to apply for a new licence and go through this process.
Seeing as you have the microphone, so to speak, are there any questions that you would like to ask of the applicant or his representative?
No, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Panel members, are there any questions that you would like to ask?
Thank you, Chair. As I see it, you currently have an operation which is a lovely vinery producing wine, and you're simply looking to have the facility to allow small groups to come along and sample that wine and take part in localised activities. Because I think what we're dealing with here is a matter of fear of what might happen. And so what you're actually doing is just giving people the opportunity to test and test for themselves the wine, not a knees-up area. No. That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
I have I had a number of questions, most of which have been answered. One of them is the exit times from the premises when people leave in the evening. How long after closing would you anticipate people being on the site for? And is that a licensing consideration?
We've already reduced the closing hour down from 11 to 9. We won't be running tours in that last hour, so I would expect everybody, and happy for it to be for condition, that they're off-site by 9 p.m.
All right, thank you. At this point, I would like to invite the interested parties to make their statement as I think you came along prepared to do. So could we start on the far left and work along?
My husband's just dived out to the loo,
Okay.
so he could maybe go at the end if that's
Okay.
all right.
All right.
Hi, yes. Firstly, apologies for my husband not being here. Unfortunately, he had to be in London. I am Gazina Moss. We are Westup Farm, which is literally one field away. So we are possibly the closest in the vicinity. Our initial concern has been about the long hours with the bottles and the recycling. A lot of that has been, we have talked about personally, and that is an improvement. I think our main concern is that initially, obviously at the moment, it's 3 days a week. It could, you know, for the tours, that it could be expanding, that the noise of people arriving and leaving could increase and increase and increase. And I think that noise is our biggest concern. I appreciate that you're confirming that, or saying that, yes, we will keep it to 20, yes, we will do this, but with the best will in the world, it's not in writing. There is nothing to say that you wouldn't turn around and say, right, actually this isn't working in this format, we now want to do something different. Once that licence has been granted, then you have that facility. And also with the best will in the world, and I do appreciate that you are trying to do something very high end and that you want it to be a good environment, but with the best will in the world, when people are leaving somewhere, when they've had a few to drink, they're not quiet. People speak louder, and I think when you say speculation is, you know, that's just, the speculation is speculation, but you've got to understand when we're living next door to something, speculation of something that is possible within having a licence is very worrying. The possibility that things could change is very concerning. You know, we're moving to, we've come to West Ham to be quiet, to be away from roads, we have a daughter with high anxiety. We want to be somewhere where it is quiet and where it is peaceful. Completely understand agriculture goes on and that the way the business is running at the moment. But you have to understand that there is no concrete that this is the way it will stay. And I think that is our biggest concern. I think if things do stay the way you say, with 20 people per tour, then I think we may well be that everyone will work, it will work well. But I think our biggest fear is the fear of the unknown, and that there is potential with being granted a licence, that things can change, that things, I mean, I know, Robin, you're the managing director, but you're not the ultimate owner of the property. And if the owners decide they want to go in a different direction, who's to say that it's not going to change?
I think I'd say two things. I'll come back to the councillor's point of it's not a knees-up place, and you know it is a high experience. And the only thing I can really say when we were talking about the future, and I can't, you know, I think the best thing to manage that is that we have an ongoing dialogue. That you know that we talk to each other. That you know where we are. We can have a formal meeting. We can have a neighbourhood meeting. Anything like that. I think if we keep talking to each other, that's probably the best I can do to say, you know, that we have a dialogue. But, you know, we've got a business plan which has been some time in the making and isn't a year or a 2-year plan, it's a long-term plan. Wine production isn't a short-term venture, and the way we've established our business is based on this premise, so I can only assure you that it's going to go on. I can't say anything else.
Thank you. I think there are a number of vineyards around Mid-Sussex particularly. There's Ridgeview, there's Bolney, there's Kingscote up near East Grinstead, there's yours, and there are others in Kent, Sussex and Hampshire, as you mentioned. And all of them, by virtue of the type of business that it is, it's a long-term business, as you say, and they are all located in quiet rural areas. And your concerns are all being heard by the panel, and we will try to take cognizance of them in our deliberations. Would you like to say something? And please feel free to keep your mask on, because you'll still be heard, yes.
Thank you. Well, I really echo what you've just said. Basically, because our house is opposite the driveway, and we've been there for 30 years, so I know what the farming noise is all around us. We're a small farm ourselves. And I think what you were saying about the fear, because I've just been diagnosed with a very rare form of leukemia, and I have to rest, and I need the calmness and the quietness of my own property to be able to relax and get better, basically. I mean, if I ever will do, I don't know that. But at the moment, I'm getting better. And I don't want the stress and the worry of all this noise and going to bed, because I will go to bed quite early, of everybody thundering down the driveway, and their lights will come across into our house if they come to the right or to the left. It bothers me. That's all I have to say, really. It's just, I can't believe what's happening around us when it's been such a wonderful place to live, and then all of a sudden it's like a nightmare's going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
The only other additional point I can really say to that is the thundering down the driveway part is we are going to, the driveway needs some work, so we could put sleeping policemen in that driveway just to make sure, as another additional thing, to stop people thundering down the driveway. So we can put that on the list of things we can do to address your specific concerns.
Thank you. I obviously echo what's been said. I would like respectfully ask the committee to at least wait your final decision until the noise management plan, in all its bespokeness, is before you. I absolutely agree and respect the balancing act you have to do. And I understand you have business to run. You understand we have lives. As what's been said, Sue has been there for 30 years. We have been in our place for almost 19. We've been through the whole agricultural thing, and I respectfully have to take issue that when it was being farmed as a, before the vineyard, there's just no question that it was in no way as intrusive as what this will be. It was seasonal, there's harvest, there's planting. It was not every day. The numbers, just the very physical numbers of human beings on the site, just even chatting, that wasn't there. The farm would come and go, whatever. It's part of the cut and thrust of living there. This is different. This is a business. And it's a 363 days a year operation, potentially. There's customers going in. It's not even, just the winemakers or your, immediate staff or your tending to the vines and all of that. It's the customer aspect. That changes it. So somewhere there is a balance. And you've mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that there are other vineyards in Sussex, and there are, and we've been to many of them. But interestingly, as part of the little preparation I have been able to do, they, for the most part, there are conditions and restrictions on what can take place. And it is less than what is proposed here. And, some, I've seen where it's, alternative Saturdays and only until maybe 3 in the afternoon. And that's it. And then the rest of the time, carry on, tend your vines, make your wine, do whatever. But there is, the all or nothing aspect goes both ways here, But please consider appropriate restrictions, and please wait until you have had sight and hopefully share with us the noise management suggestions, which I think will be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. It is possible for us to agree conditions, and I think that you have seen the proposed conditions that have been set out in the papers. We can add to those if we wish, and we can also agree an outcome based on the submission of an approved noise management plan, if that's the feeling of my colleagues on the panel when we have our discussion. but we will certainly consider all of those points very carefully. Would you like to say anything further?
I mean, really, not a lot to add because I don't want to sort of keep flogging a dead horse, really. But I think one of my, you know, I have MS, so I do need to rest. I do need to sleep in the afternoon. Like Susan and like Mr. Daniels with his Parkinson's will also say, it's a very quiet rural area, and it's why we moved there, so that I can have the sleep that I need to help me get through the day, basically. And we're only a few hundred yards from the vineyard, and I reiterate, the planting of trees and hedges will have zero effect on the noise. We are a mile away from Whiteman's Green and can hear football matches with thousands of trees as barriers, not 2 or 3 rows with a bit of hedging, thousands of trees. There's a wood, and we can still hear Whiteman's Green. Plus, obviously, the additional cars, etc., which are going to make the rural lane a noisier one. And the other that you suggest that customers will be quiet and respectful whilst drinking is frankly ludicrous. I've been on wine tours with friends that you would call high-end, and we all ended up being very loud, and it's the nature of alcohol. So there's no getting away from that. You have a drink or two, your decibels go up a degree. So I would like to know how you're going to turn these people down. All right, you turn your music down, how are you going to turn people down? You're going to go around to each one of them and say, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, and time you get to number 20, number 1 started making a noise again because they've had another drink.
I think that we've actually covered that.
I think we have, but I do feel I needed to say it.
But I do hear your concerns. Yeah, I've taken note of your concerns in that regard. Do you have anything that you would like to say? You've sat very patiently throughout.
Good afternoon. Hello, good morning. My name is John Daniels. I live about a kilometre away from the vineyard on Deeks Lane. I have Parkinson's and I often have to rest during the day. The likely effect of the noise generated by the vineyard's proposals would disturb me and create a public nuisance, as it's usually a very quiet area. There is a bridleway that runs alongside the winery site, which is a public amenity. And as a local resident, I walk up and down that bridleway quite often. I have to do it. Whilst walking may be considered transient, it's something that I happen to do regularly, and it's part of my normal daily routine. And it's pretty important for Parkinson's too, in order that you don't become a couch potato. And the surroundings are ideal at this moment in time. It's quiet and it's peaceful, and therefore any noise generated within the winery site will be intrusive to me, and therefore creating what I feel is to be an unreasonable disturbance. I would like the proposals to be significantly scaled back because of these points. That's it.
Thank you very much, and we've taken note of your concerns as well. And to end off, I'm sorry.
Okay, forgive me for being a little bit blunt here, and I know you've already gone over this, but I'm still puzzled as to how the applicant would be able to control or would want to spoil the pleasure of their customers enjoying the proposed activities. A point I would like to make is that some of the vineyards that you mentioned around the area, not all of them have got close residents, whereas this particular one has. I know the applicant mentioned sleeping policemen's put down along the bridleway. I think you might find that that would not be allowed, as it is a bridleway. And that would be disturbing the surface. The effect of the noise that's likely to happen, whether it's generated inside or outside, will for me become a public nuisance because we live so close to the winery. If the applicant proposed to continue until 9 o'clock, then this effect would create for us an even greater nuisance because it's quieter in this area in the evening. I would like to know how it is that the applicant is able to say that I would maybe not be able to hear the things around me that I've said in my application or my statement. For instance, hearing these places from far away, like Whiteman's Green and the cricket ground and Hickstead. I'd like to know actually how it is that he's able to say that, you know, these I wouldn't be able to hear very well because actually neither of them live in this area, so they wouldn't know how quiet it is at night. I also am concerned about the finishing time and the fact that visitors aren't, there's no stipulation as to when the visitors are about to leave, or there's no stipulation saying when they're going to leave, and that concerns me as well. And based on these points, I would therefore appreciate it if the applicant's proposals were significantly scaled back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers.
Yeah, so there's just one point, thank you, Chair, that I wanted to come back on that Mr. Semper raised in relation to the Thwaites case of Wirral Magistrates Court. Yes, it's right that any concerns, any conditions need to be evidence-based, but it doesn't mean that conditions can only be imposed once a problem has occurred. The purpose of the Act is to prevent problems occurring, and so any decisions, any conditions need to be based on, and the Act is fairly clear on this, and the case law is fairly clear on this, any decisions and conditions need to be based on common sense, and so they don't have to wait for problems to arrive before the conditions can be imposed. I just wanted to make that clear in case there was some confusion over that. I think it's right that it's brought to everyone's attention that it's not purely evidence-based, it's got to be using common sense. So a justifiable fear of something which hasn't happened yet can be the basis for the imposition of conditions or a decision to refuse.
Thank you.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, could you?
Sorry, I won't be long. I believe the applicant mentioned just earlier on that the use of the old farm, it would be, so sorry, I'll put this the other way, that the use of the vineyard and all the proposed tours, etc., would be no different to the farm that was already in place previously to when the vineyard was created. Well, I can say that having lived in the area for the last 60 years, that actually isn't the case, that it has significantly increased since it was made into a vineyard.
Okay, thank you. The points that I have heard are that there is a degree of noise that drifts in from Hickstead or Whiteman's Green or wherever, really, because noise does travel. So there is a degree of background noise, and when background noise is background noise, it's not always picked up because it drifts into your subconscious, so you don't actually hear that noise. And we need to consider the aspect of noise very carefully, because that is the concern of everybody. Mr. Bryant, do you have any questions that you would like to ask of anybody in the room?
No, Chair, I think everyone's made their point quite succinctly.
Good, thank you. I'm grateful that you used the word succinct. Panel members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just from my own point of view, I think that from what I've seen, what we are dealing with, as one member has said, one lady has said, is fear of the unknown. And as I've understood it from the information that we've had, this is largely based on noises coming from elsewhere, from other, as you see it, similar areas. This place is a vinery. It's to buy and sell wine. Well, not to buy and sell wine, to make and sell wine. It is today, and it will be tomorrow, whatever happens with this license. The only thing, as I see it, that's going to change is that the owners are looking to have a very small area for people to actually taste this in limited numbers, and taste this wine, and to actually make purchases, as happens already. So the only likelihood of extra noise, and I understand the fears of extra noise, and I understand the lady and gentleman have got particular health worries. I do very much feel for that. But the only difference is going to be limited occasions when people will tour the vinery. I'm just making sure that I've got this absolutely right. Tour the vinery and taste the wine, and if at any stage that becomes a little bit lawless, or somebody causes a little bit more noise during what would amount to something not much bigger than somebody entertaining in their own premises, they would immediately be asked to leave. So it's not likely to be a beer garden, as somebody mentioned earlier on, or something like that. So it's a matter of fear versus what it would be like, and I totally understand that and get that. And I think that that's what we're going to have to think very carefully about on everyone's behalf.
Can I just one point?
Please do.
Sorry. You mentioned fear, and yes, obviously there is fear. When we have referred to in various ways that we can hear Hickstead or Whiteman's Green, we're simply, and this comes back to the whole issue of acoustics and noise and what can or can't be done to mitigate. Because where we are, given the prevailing wind, it blows southwesterly most of the time, with the way the land is and just the environment, sound travels more easily. So we're only saying that because these places obviously are at a distance. The biggest prognostic indicator, if I may use that phrase, in terms of noise and acoustics and noise management is proximity to the source. So the source, you can reduce the size of the source, which is part of what we're saying, please consider putting conditions. But other than that, it's proximity. And so we are saying, in that case, we can't move our houses. This is where we are, and we are in very proximal distance to the source of the noise that will be generated. And that's, there's no getting away from that. And just one final point.
If that noise is nothing like the sort of thing that you're envisaging, then it shouldn't be a problem, should it?
Well,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We hear those messages, and we will consider them in our deliberations. Do you have anything to add, Paul?
Nothing. nothing further from a legal perspective. I think if everyone's made their representations, I think there will be the point where the panel will retire to deliberate.
Thank you, and I will just give the applicants the final word if they wish.
I'd just like to thank everybody for their time and their input, and just say that I have tried to listen to what you've said today. Whatever the outcome may be, we'll continue to listen and try and work with you going forwards.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. If you could remain in your place for the time being, and you know where the committee room is if you want to go and stretch your legs, or you know where the toilets are downstairs, and upstairs there's a disabled one. Thank you. Right. What we have done is we have, as a panel, we've gone through the notes very carefully before the meeting. We've listened to what you've had to say, and what you have had to say reinforces what you have all said in your submissions. And we've also taken note of the fact that we are required to abide by the licensing laws as were clearly set out by Mr. Bryant and assisted by Mr. Vickers. And we've also taken account of the Equalities Act and the protected characteristics that some of us, I was going to say enjoy, but it would be nice not to have to have those protected characteristics by which we live, but they have nevertheless been taken account of, and also the rights of the business owners to earn a living, and I refer to them as business owners, not as a vineyard or as a farm, but it is a business. And what we have concluded is that conditions be imposed on a license that, as per those conditions outlined in Appendix 10, which is pages 59 and 60 of the report, save to say that condition 8, proposed by the applicant's operating schedule, that the disposal of empties into waste receptacles outside the premises will not be permitted to take place between the hours of 2100, 9 p.m, and 9 a.m. to minimize disturbance to nearby occupiers. We've also added in another condition that the license be subject to an agreed noise management plan with Mid-Sussex District Council. And we would recommend that there be good neighbourly relations by regular dialogue between residents and the applicant and his staff, and that together you consider setting up a WhatsApp group to register your noise complaints. In that way, noise complaints can be received as they are happening, which is important, and that action can then be taken. Having a WhatsApp group also serves to provide a record of when noise complaints have been made, and that would be useful if further action needs to be taken at some time in the future. And we would also suggest that residents keep in mind the fact that they can make representation to environmental health officers with regard to any contraventions or any excessive noise that takes place. And one of the things that we did note in our discussion was that I don't want to advertise your product, but as far as we could see, the least expensive of your products was getting on near to £50 a bottle. So that really is high end if you sort of look at the other end of the wine market at some of the more popular supermarkets. It's a very significantly different product, and we are making our decision within the powers that we have, and we remain sensitive and concerned for the amenities of nearby neighbours. And unfortunately, as the southeast of England becomes more and more crowded, we have to learn to live in harmony closer to one another. So that is our decision, and I think the interested parties are aware of the steps that they can take in the future should they wish to do so. And with that, I would ask that we all remain in place until the live recording is completed. Thank you.